All right, welcome nerds to episode 16 of the Nerd Cantina show. Today we're going to do our Cantina conversation with Felipe Cagno, who is a writer and comic book creator. So compared to last week's Cantina conversation, which hopefully you listened to, episode 14 with Sean Mullen, the episode with Sean Mullen really focused on a different path for creating.
Talk to Sean more about getting the idea from your brain down to the sheet of paper actually itself and getting it out of your head and actually doing something with the work. This week we'll be talking with Felipe about taking it from that paper and actually getting it out into the mass audience's hands. So it's I guess you call step 2 of comic creating. Yeah.
If you ever have some kind of questions or thoughts on how Kickstarter campaigns work, how people put these things together, Felipe goes into pretty good detail on some of the learning curve that he had to go through as a writer into figuring it out, finding an audience, and having some significant success with his last campaign being funded in a little over an hour and it getting translated into his comic getting translated into a board game that also funded extremely quickly. Both those campaigns are active, and we'll encourage you all to go to our show notes and find the links to support his Kickstarter campaigns.
And with all that said, hope you enjoy the show.
Calling back all nerds. Nerds!
All right, well, welcome nerds to the Nerd Cantina show, episode 16 here.
16.
Episode 16. And we are excited to be joined today with Felipe Cagno.
Wow, that's actually perfect. Nice pronunciation.
Well, thanks. And so Felipe is a comic book creator who's really relied on the crowdfunding space, and we're excited with multiple successful crowdfunding campaigns that we will discuss in today's podcast, as well as some of those strategies on really how he's found such a strong group of individuals, of backers that have funded his most recent campaign. I think it was in an hour of your start.
Yes, 1 hour and 14 minutes. The windows have been getting shorter, which I love. It's really indicative of people enjoying the book. That's been great. Like I always like to point out or to comment on that people come for, like, readers come for the art, but they stay for the writing. So looks like both Fabiano and myself have been doing something right.
Absolutely. So before I guess we get too deep in the story, I'd love to explore a bit of your background and your inspiration into to comics. So where did your journey with comics as a fan and then later turn into a creator begin?
My father was a big comic book reader growing up. So I always had in Brazil, we always start off with the same sort of set of cartoonish strips. It's called Monica's Gang. So literally every Brazilian kid, I'm from Brazil, just starts reading Monica's Gang when they're really young. It's a very common Brazilian thing. It's something every kid does. And from then, I started reading some Disney characters. My dad loved Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck, so I read those. And then I remember even my dad saying, "Oh, it's time to leave Monica behind, and let's get you some real comics." And then he gave me like an Uncle Scrooge.
Where's that actually published? Is that like a newspaper comic strip? Did you actually have to go to a store?
They're actually published at the smaller size, and they cost like $1 or $2. And you can get them like newsstands or supermarkets and stuff. So yeah, you're talking about like 20,000 copies or 30,000 copies distribution all over Brazil. And when I think I was 12 or 13, I think I was 12, I finally picked up my very first X-Men comic. And I still remember to this day the cover was a Rob Liefeld comic with the Beast up front, and it was the Extinction Agenda number 6, part 6. So that comic just stuck with me, and then it just opened that whole kind of worms, and you just don't stop at X-Men. You start reading Batman, you start reading Spider-Man, and you just you start reading everything that Marvel and DC puts out there. And that's how I got really into comics. I was like 12 or 13. I never stopped. Surprisingly, I don't read as many Marvel and DC comics as I used to. like 10 years ago, I think. I've been reading a lot of image books, Dark Horse, Boom, a lot of independents. Like when you get into Kickstarter, you just find out that there's this whole niche there with so many cool, really well thought out stories, beautiful art. So I've been reading a lot of that. And how I got into comics as a creator, I went to film school in Brazil, and then I got into a master's program in actually California. I lived around LA for about 5 years, like 4.5 years.
Okay.
I went to Chapman University for my master's in film, and I started developing this film screenplay called The Lost Kids at school. And I was interning at 2 different production companies at the time. Without the creatives that I really became friends with talking to each other, I gave them The Lost Kids to read, and they both said the same thing. It's like, hey, so this is great. It's a really fun story, well written, but you're a 25-year-old Brazilian trying to get a fantasy 100 million plus feature film. That's never going to happen. Imagine yourself, going to a meeting with a studio head or something and pitching that idea. But what you can do is you can adapt this into another format, and if it picks up an audience, then it's a natural progression of things. You will eventually end up on the silver screen. So that's what I did. I used to love comics, and I was like, hey, I'm a very visual person, so I chose to adapt The Lost Kids into a graphic novel rather than like an actual novel, like a book. And I never looked back. That's how I started into comics. I published The Lost Kids, then I did 321 Fast Comics, then the Film Curse, then one thing leads to another.
Do you still have your aspirations of film? Like, are you still hoping to maybe see your vision on a big screen someday, or are you content with having your illustration medium?
I think both. I'm pretty happy, and it's just the best feeling in the world to connect with an audience. It doesn't matter the medium that you're doing in. Just hearing people, loving your story and your characters and caring for them, and just having an emotional connection to them. It's just the best. So I don't think that's going to change from one medium to another. I think the only advantage of film and TV over comics is that film and TV are a lot more mainstream than comics. You're just going to reach a larger audience. But as far as connecting to an audience, I think it's the same feeling. So on that side, on that sense, yes, I'm pretty content. I'm happy. I don't think even if I became the next Steven Spielberg, I would stop making comics. I would continue every now and then putting a book out. But my ultimate dream has always been, and I think always will be, to work in film. It's the medium that I'm most comfortable with. It's the medium that I had my formal education in, and they sort of overlap too much that it's just a matter of time. So back in 2012, I did write and direct my first feature film in Brazil. That got picked up by Fox International a couple of years ago. So I think it's going to get released this year or maybe early 2020. And I've been working with this manager/producing partner in LA to take some of my other IPs into that new format. I mean, there's nothing concrete, nothing we can discuss here, but as it were, like I was told, it is a natural progression. It's just someone, looking to reach a bigger audience with stuff that you created. The board game was not something that, these things are not carefully planned out. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do this and that's going to happen. No, Fabian and I just started doing the Film Curse, and we actually split up the first story into 6 parts, just because we can afford to do everything in one sitting. Yeah, so that's how, and because we did the Film Curse in issues 1, 2, 3, and 4, every time we put out a Kickstarter, it would find new readers and the audience would grow. And then eventually a Kickstarter backer put me in touch with Mike Nade, which had also a board game Kickstarter happening at the same time. So this backer was actually backing both projects at the same time. And he was like, hey, maybe you guys should talk. So it was not planned at all. And then Mike and I got to talk, and 2 years later, here's the board game.
No, it's interesting. So Kickstarter ended up being a good networking tool also with your audience.
Absolutely. It's like I say, Kickstarter is all about community, not just among creators and their audiences, but also amongst creators. Like one of the things that I really enjoy doing is reaching out to other comic book creators that are having their Kickstarters at the same time, and I reach out and, hey, we should cross promote. Like, I should tell my backers about your project. You do the same with mine. And I don't feel like I'm competing with other creators online, and I just love this collaboration aspect of Kickstarter. And obviously, when you see an audience as excited as you are for your own stuff, and they really leave comments and they help you steer the ship. So it's like, we've reached this stretch goal, so now we need to think of something else. What do you guys like? Oh, we like cards. We like mini prints. We don't care as much for that reward you had on the last Kickstarter. So it's great to always listen to the feedback that you're getting, and it's an instant feedback, because we're funding that project together. So it's pretty exciting.
Now, to go back a little bit, you had your stories and decided, to shift into the comic side of it. But you had your story going back to your first one. How did you start it to comics? Like, how did you find that collaborative team that was going to be as passionate about this project to be your illustrator, to be your letterer, and to take this to comic form?
That was not easy. So I think I effectively started working on the Lost Kids graphic novel in 2010, I believe. I didn't release it until 2013. It literally took me 3 years to get it done, because that was mistake number one as an inexperienced creator. Like, you always think like, I'm gonna work on my Opus Dei, my masterpiece. It's gonna be 500 pages long, and it's gonna be epic, and it's gonna put the Lost Kids to shame, the Lord of the Rings to shame, and it's gonna be great. And that's mistake number one. Like, if I could tell young Felipe, I would say, hey, start slow. Like, don't overstretch yourself from right out of the gate. Just start slow. Do a short story, do a single issue, and then you grow from there. Because even though the Lost Kids worked out eventually, there were a lot of bumps along the way. So you asked about the artists. So I opened an account on DeviantArt back when DeviantArt was a thing. And I started reaching out to artists. I started commissioning pieces here and there until I eventually found, and then actually my first thought was to do an art book, professionally made, with printing and stuff, so I could take that to publishers and see if they would take care of of finding the artists and putting together the team and whatnot. And that's not really how the industry works, so that was mistake number two, if you will. Publishers are not looking for big projects from novice creators. They're not, if they're gonna bet on your stuff, they want to minimize the risk as much as possible. So don't expect to have never published anything and knock on Marvel or DC's door or Image. It's like, hey, I have this idea. They're not gonna fund ideas. And then I set out, after the art book, I set out to do the comics myself. And so my biggest mistake was taking like a feature-length screenplay and making a graphic novel out of that. So it turned out to be an over 200-page book. And it's still fast-paced. Like, if looking back, the feature-length screenplay would have been much better adapted if it was a 300-page graphic. Anyway, so you start off with one artist that person is as excited as you are. Hey, I'm going to draw 200 comic pages. By page 40, the guy can't stay in it anymore, because, we all have 9-to-5 jobs. We're all doing this on the side. We're all, sort of putting not the money into it, but definitely the time. And it just gets to a point where it's like, I've done 40 pages. I'm not even halfway there. I still have another 160 plus pages to work on. So you start losing traction. And then that's exactly what happened with The Lost Kids. So what I started doing was I started splitting up the story in different chapters. So initially I split it up in half, then in 4 parts, and then ultimately in 8 parts. So if you take The Lost Kids, you have like 8 issues, and they've been drawn by literally a crew of, I don't know, like 12 artists, you know, and that's where the experience comes in. Like if I had more experience under my belt, the artwork wouldn't be that uneven. Like I had some really top professionals do like 20, 30 pages, and I had people just starting out doing another 20, 30 pages. So it looks beautiful. I'm not arguing the quality of each issue, but it's definitely uneven. And you can see it, not because of the quality, but because of the storytelling, because of the choices those artists made, the rhythm between them. So all that, you know, like, so my first advice for people starting out, start small. My second advice is do your own thing, believe in yourself. Don't expect publishers or anybody else to fund your idea or to risk your idea if you haven't done so yourself first. So those are my 2 biggest advices for creators starting out. And then it gets easier. That's the thing. I think like the first step is always the hardest. My second comic book was a lot easier to produce. It didn't take me 3 years. It took me like 6 months. And then you start building these relationships, and that's when you get to tackle longer projects with an artist, and he's just as excited as you are, and you know he's not going to lose interest halfway through because he was right there from the beginning. The Lost Kids was my thing. It was always my thing. I brought artists to collaborate with me, but it was always my thing. The Few and Cursed is a true 50-50 collaboration with Fabiano. We both wanted to do this. We both started together. It's our thing. You know, we do bring people in to help out, but it's our story. That's what we're telling together.
So when you brought this to Fabiano, did you have like a typical elevator pitch for him, where you kind of knew exactly where the story was starting and ending, or was it pretty open-ended and vague in your head still, and he helped you kind of fine-tune the details along with that?
So the next book that I did after The Lost Kids was called 321 Fast Comics, and it was an anthology of short stories. The idea behind it is that every single short story in the book needs to have 3 pages, 2 characters, and 1 twist end. And so I had like 3 pages to tell a story that would, you know, surprise readers. And I met Fabiano at a convention. We went out to lunch a couple of times. We met through other friends. And I invited him to come do a 3-page story. And that's the thing. When you invite an artist to do like a short story, 3 pages, 7 pages, 10 pages, it's easier for them to fit into their busy schedules. And so I invited Fabiano. I was like, so what do you want to draw? And he's like, I love Westerns. I never had a chance to work on a Western. Like he's done a lot of superhero stuff. He's been in the industry for like, I don't know, 15, 20 years. So he's a seasoned artist, and he's never done a Western. And I was like, okay, I'll write you a 3-page Western with a twist. And that's how, and the thing is, I was never a big Western fan like I am now. Like working on a Western really opened the door for me. Like, sure, I had seen the classics in film school, but, you know, I don't think I had ever watched a Western on my own at my place. So I always loved those treasure hunting stories like Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, Uncharted, the Treasure of Sierra Madre. And so I was like, hey, Fabian, I'm going to combine both elements. Like I'm going to do like a treasure hunting Western. And I want to put a female protagonist because, you know, cowboys are a dime a dozen. Let's do something different. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. I like it. And then so I wrote a 3-page script. He took that and he came up with a character for the Red Hat. At the time, she had a name. And then once that was published, Fabiano actually came to me and said, hey, listen, I love what we did, and I really fell in love with that character. We should do more stuff with it. I was like, yeah, we should. Let's give it some thought. And then I was like, so what kind of things do you like to draw? It's like, like traditional Westerns, hats and guns. And I was like, hey, are you into monsters by any chance? Like, yeah, I can draw a monster too. And then so I literally asked him what he wanted to draw. And then I went back into my cave, my corner, and I came up with a story with a beginning, middle, and end. So it was never open-ended. The story did evolve throughout the issues, but it remained very true to its core. So it's the Crows of Manalana. There is no water in the world. And I actually wanted to use like a narrative device to sort of justify why there are monsters in this reality. So why did they come up? And at the time, São Paulo, where both Fabiano and I live, was going through a terrible drought. There was no water anywhere. So that sort of influenced the comic as well. So it's these different little things that sort of come together for the story, and that's how the Few and Curse came to be. And Fabiano is very open to my ideas. I literally just sit down and I write like an outline or a beat sheet. I give that to him, and he's like, oh, I like this, I like that. I don't think there was ever something that he was like, oh, I don't want to draw this. He's also very collaborative in that way, that whatever I throw his way, he just finds a way to draw it. So it's pretty exciting. I love working with the guy, and it's a healthy relationship that we started like 4 years ago, and I think it's going to go on for a very long time. We both love everything that's happened with the Film Curse so far, the game, and just finally reaching the last part of the Crows of Manalani story arc. And we already discussed a lot of stuff. So we have like 3 or 4 other arcs with like 5 or 6 issues each, pretty much planned out or lined out. I mean, we don't have the details, but we definitely have more stories.
The Few and Curse, it's like you said, a lot of people come for the art, and the art is
it's top notch. It really is.
You could tell it's a seasoned artist who knows how to tell a story. And then obviously the story you created and the waterless world, limited resources, and kind of having that mystical feel to it. It's honestly it is a spectacular comic run. I'm excited to see what issue 6 is gonna close this out. And then I guess one of the questions is with Kickstarter and doing it issue by issue release. Is that what your future is, or do you try to fund, say, an entire arc?
Was going issue by issue your original intent, or is that just how it kind of played out?
That's how it kind of played out. Like, it's funny. Like, if you if you look back at all the choices that I did and Fabiano did, or it looks like it was really planned out. But it was not. So,
and that's originally what I thought, because I thought it was actually a really great idea to progress your comic, because if you get issue 1 funded, you now have your target audience. And if they enjoy it, it just makes issue 2 that much easier to get funded. And if you pick up a few more members of your audience, makes issue 3 that much easier. You've almost got your audience hooked. It's like, no one's going to cancel their HBO subscription at the last episodes of Game of Thrones. They're going to pay that $15.99 and get that last episode.
Absolutely.
So in my mind, I thought that was a really interesting way to progressively get your comic published. How did you stumble into that framework, I guess you'd say?
Yeah. So what happened was, when we decided to launch our own create our own title, so we went to some of the big publishers, Image, Dark Horse, Boom, and we saw their submissions guidelines, and all of them asks for pages of the comic, like written and drawn and colored. They want finished pages. So Fabian and I sat down and we set out to do 5 or 6, 7 pages, whatever the max that the publishers were asking for. And then I did a whole round of going to a couple of conventions, shaking hands with editors, meeting them, and, hey, can I submit this? Sure, send over the book. And then I felt that 5, 6, whatever X number of pages they ask, it's never enough. I was a untested creator. It's not like I was coming out of Marvel or DC and then doing my creator own. I felt that we weren't going to go anywhere on 5 or 6 pages. So I was like, hey, Fabiano, how about we do the first issue? Let's just do one full book, and we use that to sort of go through another round of submissions. And that's what we did. And we funded that both in Brazil and the United States. And then we realized in Brazil, we don't have big publishers. So if you want to work in comics, you kind of have to do your own thing. Crowdfunding was becoming a thing in Brazil. So after issue number 1 was complete and we submitted again, we did get some traction. Like a couple of places were like, oh, we like this. Let's talk some more. What are your plans? Whatever. I told Fabiano, I was like, listen, we made a little bit of money on issue number 1. Why don't we just do number 2? And by the time the publishers give us an answer, we're going to be done with at least 2 books. And then number 2 did a lot more business than number 1. And I was like, oh, we might have something here. And then once we did, I think the turning point, I think was issue number 3 or Chronicles, either one of them. Because then, by that point, like you said, we had our built-in audience. We had people that were coming back constantly. And not only that, but our audience was growing exponentially. It wasn't growing like by 100 backers. It was a big growth, between issues. And then it came to a point, like once we did number 4 and we had over 1,000 backers, then it's like, why do we need publishers? Because like now we got to a point where, sure, publishers, if this is a top-notch book that's selling well, it's going to sell, I don't know, 20,000 copies, 30,000 copies. But us selling 1,000 copies directly to customers on Kickstarter is a payment, is a rate or a page rate that no publisher can match.
Yeah, they're not taking their big cut off of that $3.99 that they sell a comic for. So you get that as creators to refund.
Not only that, but there's also the freedom. Like we're doing our own thing. If we wanna, tell audiences that the redhead's an alien halfway through the story, there's no editor over our shoulders saying, "No, you can't do that," or there is no exec that's looking out for whatever apparel they're selling that month. We literally can do it. Like, by the way,
we need you to put a can of Coke. Yeah, we need to put you put a can of Coke in this panel for us. We need you to do a solid.
By the way, the redhead's not an alien. That was just a craft. So Kickstarter gave us the freedom to do the books the way we wanted it to do and on the time we want to do them. So Fabiano really does take his time. We don't have anybody breathing down our necks that telling us that we need to do 1 book a month.
You're not on that monthly schedule.
No, like Fabiano takes 2 or 3 months to do each issue, and it shows. It shows on his pages, and that's fine because that's our pace. Every 3 or 4 months, we do a Kickstarter, and then we do the fulfillment, blah blah. So, and people seem to be pretty happy about it. I mean, sure, it's taking us 2-3 years to tell one story, but it keeps people excited and coming back.
And I imagine through the Kickstarter, if I was going to a publisher where you said, you can maybe have, a 10 times greater reach as far as total number of people. But through Kickstarter, I imagine you've been able to cultivate a truly like cult following with your readers on the different tier levels where you see that, hey, they're wanting these extra variants. They're wanting to connect with you as a writer and Fabiano as an artist to purchase these additional tiers. And it gives you opportunities to give some exclusives to your fan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. Like, I don't think if we had done like your traditional publishers route, we wouldn't have collectible coins. We wouldn't have like a trading card set. Like we've done, I think at this point we've done over 60 cards, collectible cards, and we did that because I've always been a collectible card nut. Like I just completed Marvel Masterpieces 2018. I did X-Men 2018 Fear Ultra. I grew up collecting Overpower. So like I've always loved cards. And then I had the chance to, work on my own cards. And it just made sense because fans on Kickstarter made that happen. I don't see I don't go into a comic book shop and I see Saga cards. At least they're not accessible. I mean, I've seen Pop Funkos and I've seen action figures and stuff, and we're talking about what's probably one of Image's best-selling titles.
Oh, for sure.
But like the Red Hat selling 1,000 copies on Kickstarter, 1,200 copies on Kickstarter, and it's enough to present these people that back us and trust us. And we get to, in turn, give them something awesome, like the cards, the comics in black and white, collectible posters. We did actual metal coins. Like every Kickstarter we're doing since issue number 4, we've been doing these metal coins. And it might sound silly, but when you hold one of those coins in your hands, it's awesome.
Well, I mean, most comic fans have that, at least a little bit of that collector in them, right? And anytime you can get some exclusivity for something you're passionate about, it sends that trigger off in your brain that gives you that like itch. Oh, I gotta have that coin.
Yep.
I gotta get that coin, or I gotta get that card. I think we all have a little bit of that in us. That's why we collect these issues and things like that.
Like
I did want to ask one question for on the creator end. So when you were shopping it to the publishers and you're only able to submit 5 or 6 pages at a time, you as the writer, did you feel a little bit more pressure to get your vision out? Because when you submit 5 or 6 pages, it's really easy to get a feel for Fabiano's art. It's right there. It's in your face. You can see it. You see the consistency and where he's going with it. But as the storyteller, 5 or 6 pages isn't really enough to give somebody your true vision of where you're trying to take this story, the turns and bends of the plot, the foreshadowing. Did you feel kind of more of that pressure on you to be able to portray that to publishers? Because
yes,
it's not that easy.
Yeah. Well, the thing is yes and no, because you do send an outline with it, so hopefully you do a good job on the outline, and that's what's going to call them. But at the same time, you also want to hook whoever's reading those 4 or 5 pages. You want to make sure that they're like, okay, I need to keep reading this. So yeah, there is that pressure, and I think that's where an exercise like the 3-2-1 is always very helpful. Like I set out to do those 3-2-1s, 3 pages, 2 characters, 1 tree standing, because that's what most editors are gonna give you. Like, I'll give you 3 pages, you better sell me on 3 pages. So 3-2-1s, I did those both as an exercise, but as also a way to learn how to, every 3 pages, keep your reader engaged. I think that was really important. But going through the submissions, it's a complicated process, because you got to understand that these companies, they're also fighting uphill battles of their own. Like comic books, yes, they had an uptick in sales, and because of the movies and everything, but it's still a pretty niche market. Like if you compare the number of tickets sold for Avengers Endgame with the Avengers title that's on the comic book store, it's a gigantic abyss between them. So I understand when publishers are reluctant to back creator that's just starting out, and especially in these days where everything is being turned into a comic book, you're gonna have like these big guns from Marvel and DC branching out and doing their own creator-owned books. So why would Image bet on a title by a novice creator when they can bet, the latest, Brian Hitch, creator-owned stuff? So, and not only that, but, and that's what I say, where I say that you as a writer, you should write what you're passionate about. But as a entrepreneur, as a businessman, it does do you well to understand what sells and what not. Okay, so Westerns, they do not sell. But that's what Fabiano was passionate about, and that's what I got passionate about, because yes, we're doing a Western, and I was traditionally not a Western fan, but this is my Western. It's a Western with a redhead, with monsters, with treasure hunting. And so I'm really passionate about that. But
yeah, Western's really more of just the backdrop. It really, it's not a traditional Western as you'd see a John Wayne movie or something like that.
And that's the thing. Like, you have Tex, that's a big seller in Italy, and it was a much big seller than it was now in the US as well. But I remember, like, I came close to closing deals with 2 publishers. I came like to their last stage, so to speak. And one of them, they were like, "Oh, it's another Western. We don't want to publish a book that's going to go up against East of West, or we don't want to put out a book that's going to compete with Pretty Deadly." And those were the 2 Western titles that's being out there. So they felt like, oh, it's going to be really tough for us to compete, especially with a new creator coming into the scene. So that it didn't speak much against the comic itself, but the genre we were working on. And it's the same thing with the board game. Like, if you go online on Kickstarter, you're not going to find a lot of Western board games. You're going to find a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, because those are your big seller genres. So, I'm not suggesting creators to try to market their vision or to try to fit whatever story they want into a genre that they think is going to sell well. But it's also not hurtful to keep that in mind. Like, in a way that I think is like, oh, if you're going to do Western, make sure you keep your expectations in check, because you don't want to. You're not going to sell like an Avengers book or a Batman book. You're doing a Western, so it's already a niche audience. If you're okay with that, go ahead. Write your book, find your audience. That's what I think is the most important. It's to find your voice and to find your audience within that frame of expectations. Just make sure you frame that right in your mind, so it's a more of an internal process.
Now that you've successfully kind of done those things, do you ever see yourself wanting to go back down to that publisher and pitch another idea? Or with the success of crowdfunding and finding that audience and being able to have the freedom that you just explained, do you see no benefit in going back to a publisher ever again?
No. I think going with publishers, there are a lot of benefits, and I came back to all of them. It didn't matter that the Free Curse didn't find a publisher. Like, it still opened the doors for us. For me personally, for Fabiano as well, I still. Every time I put out something new that I think it's going to be more in line with whatever that publisher is looking for, I always send them nice stuff. But I'll say this, for the Free Curse, it's very, very, very unlikely that I'll go with a publisher right now. It's just the math and it's just not there anymore. But for a new title, sure, why not? The way I see it, I think the perfect scenario is having the best of both worlds. So having like the Free Curse and Kickstarters, and having like another title coming monthly or every 6 months or through a publisher.
Essentially using Kickstarter to build a proven resume for publishers, saying, we have established that we've proven our writing is valid, our art is valid, you should take a chance on us.
I think so. I'm still, the thing is, like, the Free Curse has been taking so much of my time that I didn't have a chance to properly do another submission round ever since I did that properly with the Free Curse. I approached some publishers, for my new book, which is called The Dajo. It's a sci-fi. But the thing is, I haven't even translated from Portuguese to English. So that's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to sell something that is in Portuguese, you know. So. But for instance, The Dajo would be a title that I'll rather go through a publisher than on my own Kickstarter. Yes, I'm confident that I can fund that and find an audience for it. But I'll rather keep doing... the thing is, like, I also have a limited time slot, or, you know, like I can only do so many Kickstarters a year. So it's not like I can run them every month. So I'll rather continue doing Kickstarters for the few and cursed as much as possible than, you know, putting titles in there. Although, having said that, I did do 2 Kickstarters for The Lost Kids, one this year and one previously, and one last year. So, and I have something else coming up in August that's not Fear and Curse related. So, you know, like every time I find a slot in the on the calendar, I put something in there. But finding a publisher might not have means that I don't have to do that very often. You know, like I can continue to publish more and more, because that's what we want. I want to be as prolific as possible publishing new stories, you know, like, and publishers would definitely help. Editors, I think, are great. If you find yourself a good editor, it's someone who can spitball some ideas. So it can help you, you know, like steer your story that way or this way. I wouldn't like to work with like a dictator editor, like, oh, I want it that way. But someone you can collaborate with would be fantastic. I love bouncing off ideas off of people, you know, regardless whether they are an artist like Fabiano or many of the people I've worked with already, or if it's an editor, or I even, you know, throw ideas to my producing partner in LA, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? You never know where good ideas are going to come from. And the best thing is that at the end of the day, who takes credit for them is the writer. I love Tarantino's quote that says, it's great that you can steal off great ideas and still get the credit for them, or something like along those lines.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions that I had was, you kind of started alluding towards it in these last comments, was, you know, as a writer, I imagine you want your efforts to be focused on the crafting of your current story and your next arcs and everything else. But when you choose to go this Kickstarter way, I imagine there's a lot of skills you have to learn as far as promoting your own work, even kind of learning the business end of publishing and printing and the shipping, all of that, I imagine falls a bit on your shoulders to come up with that initial, you know, $4,000 goal that you had for A Few in the Curse #1. How do you come up with those figures, and what kind of skills did you have to learn to do this?
Well, it is, you have to wear many hats, and I literally learned on the go. If you take a look at the Kickstarters for the first Few and Curse and the second, there wasn't a big leap in cash value, but there was a pretty significant leap as far as backers. Like, I think one had like 100 more backers than the previous one, and it's a trial and error thing. So, you know, like I had to learn how to properly pack and ship books, because I did go through one of the Kickstarters that a lot of books got ruined on the way to backers. I had to do a lot of replacements that had an extra shipping cost. You learn the costs as you go through them. So I would, you know, like on my first tryout, I would estimate much of those figures. So I would estimate how much I would spend in printing, how much I would spend in post office. And you just learn on the go, you know, from one Kickstarter to the other. And I always tell people the first one is always the hardest. It's always going to be the one that you're going to make the less money as you thought you would. You're going to be overspending on shipping supplies, on actual shipping, on the printing, because you just have no idea what those figures are. But once you do #2, you have something to fall back on. It's like, oh, I spent, I don't know, $5,000 on shipping the last time, which means that if I have similar numbers, I'm going to spend just as much. If I have 10% extra backers, then I'm going to spend $5,000 plus 10%. So you learn from one experience to another. I'm not afraid to ask for help. I have a good friend of mine. He's a PR. He taught me how to, you know, write like press releases to send to websites, to journalists, and sort of get that going. You try finding someone that knows what they're doing as far as Facebook ads, and you look at other successful projects, what they're doing right. So, for instance, the Kickstarter exclusive cover, that's something that we started doing on the Kickstarter version number 4 only, or number 3, I think. Well, regardless, I remember that I had over 600 backers for issue number 2, but I hadn't made much more money than number 1. So I was like, what am I now learning here from one experience to another? And then I studied other successful Kickstarters. I saw Kickstarters that they had like 500 backers, but they had done over 20 grand. What did they do right? Oh, they had like a Kickstarter exclusive cover. That's something that backers like. That's something they can get behind. They don't mind paying like an extra $4 or $5 if it means they're going to have something exclusive for them, And that's how I learned from one to the other,
When I was reading the comics, I as I was scrolling, in the beginning of the issues with where you're giving credit to everybody, there is a little bit of fine print of the trademarking and things like that. And I did think to myself, it's like, who tells you what to put in there? Who the fuck knows all this legal jargon that essentially you have to put in the comic just to make sure that nobody's stealing your stuff, but it's like, do you just Google it and copy and paste it on the comic? Do you call a lawyer and have to pay that couple $100 fee? Like, hey buddy, I just made a story and I need to put that little fine print in my comic to make sure that all my legalities are covered. It's like little stuff like that ends up scaring myself into venturing off into this creator's world. It's those like minutia details, because you don't want to put all this work in and then have something like that fine print be the thing that damns you in the end.
Right there, you learn as you go. Like I remember when I first learned, I had to get an ISBN code, because you cannot publish a book without an ISBN code. So then I was like, oh, okay, so how do we do this in Brazil? How do we do this in the United States? How does it work? How much do I have to pay? You're right about something. We do have Google. So, hey, Google, how can I get an ISBN code? Google will tell you how to do that. Or you can just, like I see you have a lot of comics behind you. Just, pick up a comic, open that first cover and see what's going on there, and just... it is a learning curve. One thing I do try to do is to sort of shield Fabiano as much as possible from that business side of the partnership, because I want him focused more on drawing as possible. And let's face it, there's a big difference between writing a 23-page story and drawing that same 23-page story. While I do a lot of outlining and beat sheets, by the time I'm ready to sit down and actually write the script, I can hammer that script out in like 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I'm not feeling that inspired. Fabian is going to take 2 months to draw that, so that's 1 extra month of work that he gets that I don't. So I'm the guy that puts together the Kickstarters. I'm the guy going after the ISBNs. I'm the guy doing the submissions. And I don't mind doing those things. I love doing those things. It's that's the thing. You gotta really get into it, because it can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. But you do have every information right there at the tip of our fingertips.
Was there any info that kind of gave you like a checklist, or was it all trial by fire? Were you able to like Google it and go down the list like, oh, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this?
Does Kickstarter provide you any resources or any checklists that they need from you?
No, it's all trial by error. I always tell people.
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I have a few of my own writing ideas. I just currently started outlines on my first comic that I want to write. I'm on about the 3rd issue outline, And talking with you, talking with our guests that we had last week, I am really just trying to crowdsource information. I'm picking your brain. I'm picking his brain. And I am shamelessly doing so. I don't care. As much, we live in a day and age where people and information are at the access of your fingertips. Right. And the only thing holding you back from doing these things is either, laziness or fear. So I'm trying to conquer both those things at the same time.
I'll tell you that much. I remember back in the Lost Kids, when I had to sign my first real contract with an artist, I had to draft that contract. I had to find a template and just sort of tweak it to fit whatever needs I had at the time. And I found this Alan Moore book. Alan Moore's A Guide to Writing or something like that. It's a very short book, but it comes with a number of templates, and it tells you a lot about the business of writing a comic. And that the same goes for Words for Pictures that Brian Michael Bendis put out. So and
those are two big names in comics.
Yeah, you want to respect them. They might know a thing or two about what they're doing.
they might know a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit.
For instance, Word for Pictures, the Bendis book, he dedicates more than one chapter just on the business side of things. And he keeps telling you that writing is just not enough. You gotta be savvy on the business side as well, how to promote yourself, how to handle yourself, how to take care of yourself. He has a whole chapter dedicated to accounting, because a lot of people just think, I'll write a comic and I'll make a buttload of money. Sure, but what are you going to do?
I don't know who's thinking that. But man, I might make a little money. I don't know if anybody writing a comic in their basement's thinking buttloads.
But that's the thing. So, I can give you a dozen titles of books that I read, and I don't even know where to point people on the web to find these things because they're so quick and fast-paced. Whenever I have a short question, it's little, But for any writer out there that's setting out to do their own thing, I would highly recommend reading Words for Pictures and Alan Moore's Guide to Writing or something like that, because they're not only going to help you with your writing, but also your career as a whole. And you got to look after your career, you don't want to just be writing.
Now, that's part of our motivation for putting this out on the podcast also, is that we realize that fear and motivation do hold a lot of people's creativity back. And to hear stories like yours and see how, the only thing really holding you back in this digital age is your fear and motivation. You don't have the excuse of, 50 years ago having to travel to New York and get that meeting with that one guy and follow him to the restaurant and corner him when he goes to the bathroom and shove a script down his throat. Those days are essentially over, with the days of crowdfunding and the digital internet age. So we do our one of our mission statements is to just put this out there and encourage people's creative side and to get these things out.
And I think that's the scary part, is how I'm supposed to dive into this unknown experience, which is to be an entrepreneur, because essentially that's what you are. You're not just a writer. But you can do things in your rhythm, at your own pace, and you can learn as much as possible along the way, so it's not as intimidating.
We appreciate all of your time. Your story is absolutely great, both you and the Cursed, and we hope that we can inspire some to go out there and support your Kickstarter campaign as you're in this last issue here on this arc. But also your personal story. Again, just being a creator, this is what we're trying to inspire, both in ourselves and hopefully people who are listening who have a great story in their mind and lack a little bit of action and a little bit of understanding of how the system works. And it can be figured out. You figured it out not just on Kickstarter in the U.S., but also crowdfunding sources in Brazil simultaneously and made this successful. So it's great inspiration for those who want to get out and just have their story heard and told. Link up with people that are passionate about it, collaborate together, find those artists, find those people who are as bought into what you want to do, and there's a way to make it work, whether it's through Kickstarter or other means.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet if I asked young Felipe if he ever thought he'd have a board game out, he would probably say no.
Oh yeah, we haven't we haven't even really talked very much about the board game, but yeah, we know that you just launched that Kickstarter for the board game last week, correct?
I told already how Mike and I got together, which was through like a common backer between two projects, and what I loved about Mike's work on this board game for the thinkers is he didn't have like a template that he sort of just fit the comics into. He actually read the comics, and from the ground up he built this experience which puts players right into the wastelands of the Pacific Ocean. You're going to be a curse chaser yourself. You're going to be chasing monsters. You're going to be going after artifacts. And he also came up with a way that it sort of shows how scarce resources are in this world. So it's a really fun game. No, I did not have any idea that I would have a board game based on one of my comics. I mean, it's one of the things you hope for. I hope for a TV series or a film someday, but whether it's going to be executed, it's going to be produced or not, you never know. So it was truly awesome just going through this experience with Rock Manor Games and Mike, because it was like I told him like the whole story and how this world works, and he translated that into a gaming experience that was like mind-blowing. And we've been actually collaborating a lot together as far as like he handled all the game design and I did all the art because he loved the art for the comics. So I brought in a lot of the artists that did stuff for either the Film Curse or any of my other books. So the artwork on the game itself is just gorgeous. Like a lot of the artists, they were turning in cover quality, illustrations. Yeah. And it got to a point where I was like, hey, Mike, we need to do an art book for this. These artworks, they're too beautiful to just be featured in the game with a lot of gaming design on top of it. So there's an art book that's available through the Kickstarter for the board game as well. And, we launched last week. We launched on Tuesday, so we're going to be completing our first week tomorrow. It's fully funded.
I was going to say, how long that would take to fund? Because I see that's fully funded now.
Well, that's the thing. Like when you're funding a comic book, like the goals are a lot, smaller. Like the Film Curse number 6 was $7,500. The game, like you have costs with miniatures, with the decks. It's just a much more expensive endeavor. So our initial goal was $50,000. It took us a while to get there. I mean, obviously not long.
There's a lot of board game creators in Kickstarter that would hope for a while funding there.
So it took us the better part of 3 days to fund it. But Mike and Rock Manor, they have like a really built-in audience already. They have I think they have like 5 or 6 very successful Kickstarters already, and it's been a blast. Looking people just seeing different people excited about something that you have to create. It's pretty awesome, and it's fun because one thing that was planned and we did do right was actually have both the last issue and the game on Kickstarter together. I felt that was important because if players wanted to know more about this world, they could do it without leaving the safety of Kickstarter. They're used to that platform. They know what to expect, and I wanted them to have that feeling. It's different than pointing them to a website outside this comfort zone. So that's why I wanted to have the Kickstarter for the comics happening at the same time of the board game. At the same time, the opposite way is it's possible. It's the same thing as well. Like comic book readers that are not very familiar with board games, if they want to get this because they're a fan of the comics, they can do so without leaving, Kickstarter. So both campaigns sort of have been helping each other out. We have a number of backers that are on both Kickstarters, and it's been fun. It's been a fun summer so far.
Yeah, we have a board game reviewer who lives in New Zealand that writes our board game reviews. So we're gonna have to point him in your guys' direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is the he can play it on Tabletop Simulator, and he can actually review the game while we're still running the Kickstarter. Yeah.
Okay, for sure. We'll definitely send him that link.
Yeah, you guys are welcome to play too. We might have like a session on Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your time. Love what you're doing. We will be following closely and backing ourselves as.
Yeah, you definitely have some supporters at the Nerd Cantina.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, guys.
It is truly amazing art and comic, and curious to see what the direction is, what the next Kickstarter campaign is for one of those next 2 or 3 arcs that you've got in the works right now in your head, and see kind of how it ramps up.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Ken. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And then when the Nerd Cantina gets their first Kickstarter up and running for this little doodle I have in my head, we'll make sure we'll send you a link. You can critique the shit out of me.
Yep, sure. I'll interview you guys. We'll do the opposite.
All right.
I don't speak Portuguese though, so it'll have to be American based.
Well, start learning. It's a tough language.
I played World of Warcraft with a friend from Brazil, and yeah, Portuguese it's a pretty tough language from what I was taught.
I almost got a job as a translator for World of Warcraft about 10 years ago.
Well, it's interesting.
Thank you again.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks for giving us some time. We look forward to posting this up for all
Absolutely.
Our listeners and readers.
I just wanted to say thank you both for having me over. I obviously love sharing my experiences because I know it's key. We're all learning as we go. So as much as I can do for the next guy down the line, I'm happy to do so. This was a really good chat. You guys really steered the conversation in a very nice way.
All right, well, that was our interview with Felipe Cagno. And again, he has a great story, really interesting path from his studies into actual film production, then translating that down into the graphic novel format, which he was always a fan of, and then just figuring things out on Kickstarter once the industry really wasn't very receptive, but obviously the fans were, and he found those fans through Kickstarter. It's really inspirational for us as we are contemplating creating, and I think this episode should be beneficial for people who have those stories in their head.
Yeah, this was a little bit of a selfish endeavor on my part in doing the research on how I wanted to get my own ideas published. I did find that a lot of this information was going to be valuable, and I thought we should put it out to our audience as well as for anybody else that might have ambitions of being a creator. It was very interesting to hear from him about, his path to publishing, which is essentially the literary version of making a mixtape and selling it out of your trunk digitally. So it was very beneficial because I think that we're going to end up having to go a similar route. I am not for one to stand in those lines and be that unknown name talking to publishers. So his views on Kickstarter and his path were very interesting to me, and I think that we will try to end up going the same route.
Yeah, and I think this episode can have a lot of value for really anybody who's been contemplating getting into comics. There's a lot of fans out there. There's a lot of people who think they have interesting stories, and this just shows that there really aren't significant barriers. Maybe there's some skills that need to be learned, some time that needs to be committed to these things, but in the end, they're all overcomable. So if you know somebody who might be of creative mind, who has a story that might work in this medium, share this with them and allow them to hear Felipe's story. It may inspire them to some level of action, and you may have a friend with a Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, so far the theme to this has been don't be a scared little bitch and just go do it. Show some initiative. Quit fucking talking yourself out of it. And start talking yourself into the why can't I? We've given some examples of people that were able to shake that fear and really just say screw it. Like we said, there's kids making millions of dollars playing with toys on YouTube. Take your idea and do something with it. You never know that those parents that were letting their kids play with those toys never realized the potential that their YouTube channel was going to have and their creation was going to have. And now it's a thing, so make yours a thing. Just take your idea and run with it. Show some initiative. Don't be scared and go.
All right. Well, with all that said, I want to thank all you listeners for listening this far and getting through episode 16. We're grateful for the audience that we have, and we appreciate your support. If you wish to continue to support us in another way, we encourage you to go find us on Patreon. You'll see the links in our show notes at thenerdcantina.com/show16. You'll also find the links to the Kickstarter campaigns for both Felipe's graphic novel as well as his board game campaign that is going active currently. Any Patreon support that we get is immensely important to what we're trying to do as we're still navigating this space, and it allow us to advertise, market, and improve our audio quality, which all gets us to book more and more fascinating creators and individuals like what we did today.
Yeah, we have aspirations that we have set for ourselves, and becoming a Patreon supporter, even at the $1 tier, goes a long way to helping us out and getting that, putting a motor on that little tugboat that we got going, up the stream here. And, we greatly appreciate all our Patreon supporters. We definitely want to provide some extra content and some extra perks for those that are willing to put their money where they see value, and try to just put together a better show for you guys.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and farewell, nerds.
Take care.